In the heart of a tense congressional hearing, Jasmine Crockett goes head-to-head with the relentless Marjorie Taylor Greene as a battle of words spirals into a fight for political survival. With the nation watching, Jasmine is ruthlessly attacked, her integrity dragged through the mud, her career thrown into jeopardy. Greene's accusations are brutal, personal, and designed to break her, but Jasmine doesn't lash out. She stands her ground, calm and poised, armed with nothing but cold, hard truth and undeniable evidence. In just 90 seconds, she exposes Greene's dirtiest tactics, shattering her opponent's narrative and flipping the entire debate on its head. Can one woman armed with integrity change the course of American politics? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. It began like any other congressional hearing, wood striking marble, cameras panning across solemn faces, the hum of policy jargon building in the background. But when Marjorie Taylor Greene leaned into her microphone, everything detonated. Clad in a stark white blazer in defiance, she bypassed all decorum. No opening on immigration reform, no nod to the panel. Instead, she fixed her gaze on Jasmine Crockett, seated calmly at the witness table, like a storm waiting its turn. "Let's cut the pretense," Greene declared, her southern drawl sharpened into a dagger. "This hearing isn't about fixing the border. It's about giving washed-up Democrats like Ms. Crockett a few more minutes on prime time before their careers flatline." The room tensed like a rubber band stretched to breaking. Even veteran aides froze mid-note. Jasmine Crockett calls herself a civil rights attorney, but what's she really done? Her district is overrun with crime, her record is paper thin, and the only place she seems to fight is on social media. Jasmine didn't blink, but Greene's words hit with calculated force. Less policy critique, more character assassination. At 43, Ms. Crockett is a walking fossil in a party that's sprinting towards socialism and leaving moderates behind. She's not here to bring substance. She's here to cling to a spotlight that's quickly slipping away. Audible gasps rose from the gallery. Journalists glanced at each other. The CNN Chiron adjusted mid-sentence. Greene wasn't debating. She was launching a political airstrike. And Jasmine, still silent, refused to bite. Not yet. Not with rage. Her hands didn't move. Her lips didn't tighten. But her eyes, those eyes, locked onto Greene with the quiet fury of someone who'd been underestimated before. This wasn't debate. This was a public attempt at erasure. And the country wasn't just watching a hearing anymore. They were witnessing the opening salvo of a war between two women, and one of them had just thrown the first match onto a floor soaked in gasoline. And yet, through the wreckage of words Marjorie Taylor Greene hurled across the chamber, Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch, not because she wasn't bleeding, but because she had already chosen her weapon. While Greene ranted, Jasmine sat at the heart of the hearing room like the eye of a hurricane, calm, centered, unmoving. The walls buzzed with tension, journalists whispering behind their press badges, camera lenses silently zooming in for signs of a crack. But Jasmine gave them nothing. Her hands rested atop a leather-bound folder, fingers steepled in eerie stillness, her gaze never straying from Greene's contorted expression. Beneath the surface, her pulse ticked like a metronome wound tight, but her mind, sharp as ever, was already calculating. She waited. Waited not for her turn to speak, but for the precise moment to strike with something heavier than retaliation. Then slowly, so subtly it was almost invisible, she reached into the inside lining of her bag, pulling out a small folded piece of aged paper. It was worn, creased at the edges, a remnant from another battle, another betrayal, and as she slipped it into the back flap of her testimony file, the entire energy around her seemed to shift. This was no longer a defense. It was the prelude to an execution. She didn't wait for applause. She didn't raise her voice. When Jasmine Crockett leaned into the microphone, it wasn't to retaliate. It was to restore gravity to a chamber that had been hijacked by spectacle. The moment was razor thin, suspended between outrage and control, but Jasmine chose the harder path. Restraint sharpened into precision. Her breath was steady, her eyes forward. And when she spoke, her voice was neither cold nor fiery. It was something more terrifying to opponents, undeniably clear. I appreciate the opportunity to respond, she began, and even that simple sentence landed like a brick in water. I sat here while my name, my work, and my purpose were dragged through the mud, not by someone asking about policy, but by someone desperate to turn governance into gossip. The room didn't stir. It held its breath. Her tone was low, grounded, with the weight of lived experience behind every syllable. So let me speak, not just to the insult, but to the record. She turned one page in her folder, her fingers calm, movements methodical, like someone assembling evidence for a jury she knew was watching. I began my career not in a press booth, but in courtrooms no one wanted to walk into. Courtrooms where families cried because insurance fraud had left them bankrupt while CEOs bought jets. She paused. Let that hang. I led investigations into those schemes. I didn't tweet about injustice. I prosecuted it. Her voice tightened, not with emotion, but with deliberate focus. In Texas, I helped dismantle a multi-state human trafficking operation that targeted Black and Latina girls. Girls the system ignored, girls no headline mentioned, girls whose names no one remembered but mine. Her hand hovered above the next page, then pressed it down. And before some of my colleagues could spell fentanyl, I was filing lawsuits against pharmaceutical giants. Yes, the same ones now donating to campaigns. Because justice doesn't wait for polling data. She paused again. Not for drama, but for clarity. So when Ms. Greene questions my relevance, let me be painfully clear. I didn't chase relevance. Relevance chased me when people in power refused to show up. I was the one who stayed. Her voice dropped half a register, not louder but deeper, more intimate, more lethal. I do not measure my worth by screen time. I measure it by the lives restored when systems fail. And yes, I'm still here. Not because I begged for a spotlight, but because when things break, I know how to fix them. She looked up finally, locking eyes with Greene. Not with hatred, but with the stillness of someone who had stood alone in rooms full of noise before, and never once lowered her standards to match the volume. In that silence, no one could miss the shift. This was no longer defense, it was declaration. And the insult that had opened this hearing had just been drowned beneath the weight of a career spent in trenches far deeper than a camera could ever see. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't finished, because when you weaponize someone's identity, you invite the kind of truth that doesn't whisper, it detonates. And now, as Marjorie Taylor Greene sat stewing in the echo of her own performance, Jasmine made a deliberate move, not to retaliate, but to reveal. Her fingers moved without hurry, unfolding the aged piece of paper she had hidden in the inner sleeve of her binder minutes earlier. Not a prop, not a gimmick, a printed memory, a mirror Marjorie never expected to see held up, least of all in front of the nation. Jasmine didn't immediately speak. She let the paper hover in her hands, letting its weight become visible, its significance radiating outward in silence. The tension inside the chamber coiled again. Even the usual whispers that fill the corners of hearings, the rustle of aides, the clicking of pens, faded beneath the rising anticipation. The paper itself looked like something saved, not printed for effect. The edges slightly curled, the crease down the middle soft from being folded, unfolded, and folded again. A document carried not out of vanity, but necessity, carried by a woman who knew exactly how often truth was treated as disposable until it became undeniable. I wasn't planning to bring this out, Jasmine said, her voice low but unmistakably anchored. But when someone rewrites history in real time, someone needs to remind the room what actually happened. She paused, eyes locked on Marjorie across the table. Not years ago, not decades, just 4 years back. She held the page higher, angling it slightly so the cameras could catch the header at the top. The Dartmouth Free Press, 2019 interview. Greene on political civility. The words were black and white, permanent, uneditable now. Jasmine's voice was clear, without performative outrage, just the slow, surgical rhythm of a prosecutor unsealing a file the jury never expected to hear. In 2019, she continued, long before the green room lights, long before the coordinated talking points, Congresswoman Greene gave a college interview. In that piece, she spoke at length about the erosion of political discourse. Another pause, intentional, unhurried. And I quote, "We need fewer attacks and more accountability." I admire people like Jasmine Crockett, who prosecute injustice no matter who's in power, and who understand that real courage means staying above the noise. The impact was immediate. Greene froze, the composure she'd clung to through previous exchanges now cracking beneath the weight of her own words. Her hand twitched slightly, reaching for a pen that she didn't need. Any motion to regain grounding. But nothing could soften what had just been unleashed. The room didn't erupt in chaos. It collapsed into silence. Not dead silence, charged silence. The kind that follows a long-buried truth surfacing where it's least welcome. Jasmine let the quote settle. She placed the paper gently on the desk, smoothing the edge with her palm, like someone tucking in a document for the record. Then, with eyes that didn't blink and a voice that cut deeper by staying measured, she spoke again. "I remember reading those words back then," she said. "They didn't flatter me. They didn't benefit me, but they reflected something rare, honest recognition of public service across political lines. And they meant something until today." The words tightened like a noose, not shouted but precise, unrelenting. Because what we just witnessed wasn't a disagreement, it was character assassination. The very thing you once said was destroying our democracy. The very thing you said you stood against. Jasmine leaned forward slightly, not looming, but steady, anchoring herself into the center of the chamber, as if daring the walls themselves to deny what she was saying. "So now I ask you, on this record, on this floor, on this broadcast, when did you decide that what you believed no longer served you? When did admiration turn into amnesia?" She held Greene's gaze, giving her no out, no distraction. "Was it when I refused to be silent about voter suppression? Was it when I challenged billion-dollar drug companies in a courtroom instead of just tweeting about them? Or was it simply when you learned that undermining me would get more clicks than quoting me ever did?" The final sentence struck with a truth so sharp it left the air between them carved clean. Jasmine didn't move to gloat. She didn't raise her voice in triumph. She sat back, spine straight, letting her silence finish what her words had begun. The message was clear. You don't get to rewrite history when someone still has the receipts. Across the room, staffers avoided eye contact. Reporters whispered furiously into phones. The C-SPAN feed zoomed in slowly, instinctively, onto Greene's face, now drained not of color, but of certainty. And though the gavel hadn't fallen, it felt like a verdict had already been delivered. This was no longer a hearing. It was a reckoning. The silence in the chamber was suffocating. It wasn't just the stillness of a moment suspended. It was the kind of silence that followed the impact of a blow. Jasmine Crockett sat there, her body perfectly composed, but her presence commanding. The weight of her words still hung in the air, lingering like smoke after a fire. Marjorie Taylor Greene had delivered her personal assault with all the malice of a woman accustomed to breaking things with words. But Jasmine wasn't breaking. She was building something, and those in the room, audience and lawmakers alike, knew it. As the room held its collective breath, Jasmine didn't rush to fill the silence. She knew this moment was hers to claim, and she claimed it in silence. Slowly, deliberately, she shifted in her seat, her posture still relaxed. But there was a quiet confidence in the way she held herself. Her fingers brushed lightly over the edges of her binder, but she didn't immediately open it. No, she would wait. She would make them wait, because she knew something they didn't. The real battle wasn't in the back and forth of insults. It was in the facts, the truth, the things that couldn't be twisted, and she had them all. Finally, when it was time, Jasmine spoke again, her voice quiet at first, but unmistakable, clear, and steady, like a warning whispered just before the storm hit. "I came here today to talk about solutions. I came here to discuss the very real issues facing the people of Texas, the issues they live with every single day. The crisis at the border isn't just a political talking point for me. It's personal. It's about the families I represent, the communities I fight for." Her eyes stayed locked on Greene's, unwavering. There was no trace of anger in her expression, only something far more dangerous, dispassionate truth. But instead of hearing about policies or solutions today, what did we get? A personal attack, a smear campaign disguised as debate. The weight of her words settled like a heavy burden in the air. She wasn't just speaking to Greene anymore. She was speaking to everyone listening, to the nation, to the lawmakers, to anyone who might think this was just another show. Ms. Greene has decided that the hearing today isn't about the issues that matter. It's about making me the target of her political theater. Jasmine's fingers gripped the edges of her binder a little tighter now, a subtle movement that didn't break her calm, but served as a reminder of the control she held over the situation. And while I came here ready to engage on the issues, I won't sit quietly while my character's attacked. You see, Miss Greene, when someone makes an accusation like that, they open the door to the truth. And when that door's opened, I'll walk right through it, and I'll walk through it with facts. Her voice didn't rise, but there was a steel edge now, something that carried through every syllable, each word deliberate, measured, and lethal. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to scream. She just needed to speak with the kind of quiet certainty that left no room for doubt. I didn't come here to defend myself from petty insults. I came here to defend the truth. And if Ms. Greene wants to make this personal, then I'll make it a fight she's not prepared for. Her eyes locked again with Greene's. She could see the flicker in her opponent's gaze now, the uncertainty, the realization that she had crossed a line, that the battlefield had shifted. Jasmine reached forward then, opening her binder with slow, deliberate motions, every turn of the page an exhale of quiet intent. She wasn't trying to rush. She wasn't trying to intimidate. She was simply gathering her ammunition, ready to lay it out for all to see. I don't need to stand here and yell. I don't need to get emotional. What I have are records. I have the truth. And I will show you what real accountability looks like, because that's what I came here to talk about today. The tension in the room was suffocating. The instant the document left Jasmine Crockett's hands and floated into view, the atmosphere shifted, not just in the chamber, but across the entire televised nation watching. She didn't need to speak first. The power of her silence, the slow unfolding of a single sheet of paper, was far more potent than any words she could have mustered. The chamber felt smaller now, suffocating under the weight of what was about to happen. Jasmine was no longer defending herself. She was setting the stage for a public reckoning. The memo wasn't a simple sheet of paper. To Levitt, it was a death sentence. As Jasmine held it up, there was no fanfare, no dramatic pause, just the sharp, unmistakable clarity of truth being exposed for all to see. A memo from Marjorie Taylor Greene's own communications team telling her staff to prioritize personal attacks on Crockett because, in their words, she knows policy better than we do. It was like holding up a mirror to someone who thought they could manipulate the reflection. The room froze. Everyone could feel it. The stakes had just been raised, and now there was nowhere to hide. Jasmine's eyes were steady, unflinching, and as the memo hung between them, she could sense the shift. This wasn't just about policy anymore. It was about exposure, about unmasking the true tactics behind the soundbites. And Greene knew it. Her face lost color almost instantly, her confident demeanor slipping away, like sand through fingers. The very woman who had tried to tear down Jasmine's character, who had used every ounce of political energy to strike below the belt, now found herself on the receiving end of an attack she couldn't escape. For the first time in the hearing, there was no snarky retort, no snide comment, only a woman who was visibly caught in the web of her own lies. The room held its collective breath as Greene fumbled for words, her mind scrambling to patch together some form of defense. Her voice shook when it came, but there was no conviction in it. That's not what it means, she stammered, the crack in her voice almost audible over the low murmurs in the room. It was taken out of context, she tried again, as if repeating it would somehow make it true. But even as she spoke, the cracks in her armor deepened, and the room could feel the unspoken truth hanging heavy in the air. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. This was her entire strategy unraveling in front of a live audience. Jasmine remained perfectly still, her eyes unwavering, like a prosecutor watching a witness sweat under cross-examination. She didn't need to rush. She didn't need to shout. Every second of silence stretched out, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Finally, when Jasmine spoke again, Her voice was deliberate, measured, each word carved with precision. It's not taken out of context, Ms. Levitt. This is your playbook. You've made it clear. You were told to attack me personally because I've consistently beaten you on the facts. You're not interested in solutions. You're interested in destroying anyone who knows more than you. The chamber was still. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every second of this transformation. Jasmine wasn't just defending herself. She was dismantling the narrative Greene had so carefully constructed, piece by piece. The fight had shifted. Jasmine wasn't playing by Greene's rules anymore. She wasn't responding to her petty insults or twisted accusations. She was simply showing the world the truth. Her gaze didn't falter as she continued, her voice still steady, but now it carried the full weight of someone who had been through battles like this before and had always emerged victorious. This memo doesn't just expose you, it exposes everything about how the game is played in Washington. You don't want solutions. You want to tear down anyone who threatens your agenda. She paused, letting the words sink in. But what you fail to understand, Ms. Levitt, is that this country needs more than destruction. We need people who can stand up, who can debate the issues, and who can actually bring real change to the table. And that's something you'll never be able to take away from me. Levitt's response came, but it was weak, barely a defense at all. She tried to backtrack, to reframe the memo, but the truth had already been set free. It was out there, and no amount of shouting, no matter how loud or defensive, could erase it. The damage was done. Jasmine had exposed the heart of the hypocrisy, the manipulation and political gamesmanship that had been used to undermine not just her, but the very process of this hearing. And in this moment, Jasmine had won. It wasn't just about defending her honor. It was about showing everyone in the room and everyone watching at home. The truth, when delivered with integrity, could cut through the noise and reach straight to the heart of the matter. As the chamber simmered in the stunned silence, Jasmine Crockett sat there, unyielding and calm, her presence now undeniable. She had taken control of the narrative, and with the truth in hand, no one could refute it. The room was heavy with the silence that followed Jasmine's revelation. It wasn't the kind of silence that fills a space after a dramatic argument. It was the kind of silence that signals the moment when everything changes. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just holding her ground anymore. She was reshaping the narrative, reclaiming the moment in a way that only a woman who had spent years in the trenches of public service could. But this wasn't just a fight for herself. This was a fight for everyone watching at home. Everyone who had ever wondered if there was more to politics than the circus that the media often portrayed. As she turned toward the cameras, the air seemed to thicken with anticipation. Her eyes locked with the lens, the sharpness of her gaze cutting through the clutter of noise in the room. She wasn't just speaking to the people in that chamber anymore. She was speaking to every single person watching. She knew the stakes, and with each word, she made it clear that she had come for more than just a political debate. She had come for accountability. This, Jasmine began, her voice calm, but every syllable filled with the weight of years of frustration and resolve, is why America can't solve the border crisis. It's why we haven't been able to tackle the real problems facing our country, because we've allowed ourselves to be distracted by petty personal attacks instead of focusing on what really matters. She paused, allowing the weight of her statement to sink into the room. The lawmaker sitting across from her, and everyone watching, felt the magnitude of her words. Her eyes didn't stray from the lens. She wasn't speaking just for her district, just for Texas. She was speaking for the millions who were tired of the status quo. This isn't about me. It's not about any one person, she said, the sharpness in her voice unmistakable. It's about the people who wake up every single day, facing the real consequences of inaction. It's about the families caught in the middle of a broken system. And yet here we are, watching someone turn a serious issue into a spectacle while the crisis continues to worsen. The silence that followed was thick. It wasn't just the audience holding their breath. It was the world waiting for her next move, knowing that Jasmine wasn't here to play games. She wasn't here to let the game be defined by sound bites and empty accusations. She was here to redefine what accountability meant. Her tone softened for just a moment, but the message was clear. cutting through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. I didn't come here today to engage in personal attacks. I came here to talk about real solutions to the border crisis. I came here to represent the people who can't afford to waste time on political theatrics. Her voice remained even, but there was an unmistakable resolve. And yet here we are, caught in the middle of someone's attempt to tear me down rather than engaging on the issues that truly matter. Jasmine leaned forward just slightly, as if to close the distance between herself and Greene. The stillness of the room was almost suffocating, but Jasmine's presence seemed to expand, filling every inch of the space. "You chose to play a game, Ms. Greene," she continued, her voice now low but carrying an intensity that commanded attention. "You chose to attack me personally, not because of anything I've done, but because you couldn't compete on policy. You knew I was too prepared, too experienced, so you decided to play dirty." She reached for her binder, slowly flipping through the pages, deliberately, as if every second mattered. This wasn't just a retort. It wasn't an emotional response. It was calculated, like a seasoned litigator preparing for closing statements. She stopped at the right page, her eyes momentarily scanning the document. When she spoke again, her voice was still calm, but the weight of her words made the chamber feel like it had shrunk even further. "I don't hate you, Ms. Greene," Jasmine said, the words landing like a hammer. "But what you've done here today, what you continue to do, is something I will not stand by. I will hold you accountable for choosing a path that damages our democracy, that weakens the very fabric of our political discourse." Her gaze never wavered. "And I will make sure you face the consequences for that choice." There was no malice in her words, no fury in her voice. There was only a quiet, unwavering determination that left no room for doubt. Jasmine wasn't speaking to a person anymore. She was speaking to a legacy of political manipulation that had done nothing but divide the country for far too long. "I'm not here to tear you down, Mrs. Greene," she continued, "but you've shown the world exactly what happens when we choose personal destruction over progress. You've made your choice, and now I'm going to hold you accountable for it." The room seemed to hold its collective breath, the pressure building as Jasmine finished. This wasn't a personal vendetta. It wasn't a call for revenge. It was an assertion, a statement that would echo far beyond the confines of the hearing room. Jasmine had made it clear. She wasn't just defending herself. She was defending something much greater, the very principles of fairness, integrity, and justice that should guide this nation's political discourse. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. Jasmine Crockett had just exposed the heart of Marjorie Taylor Greene's strategy, and the aftermath of that revelation was thick with anticipation. Jasmine's words still hung in the air, their weight sinking into every corner of the chamber. Greene, for the first time in the hearing, was speechless, caught in the web of her own manipulation, desperately searching for a way out. Jasmine, however, didn't rush. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what was coming next. The room felt like it was holding its breath, every gaze fixed on Greene as the silence stretched on, suffocating. Jasmine was calm, too calm, and yet there was a fire behind her eyes that couldn't be ignored. She laid her case with precision, unveiling the personal attacks, the backroom games, and the hypocrisy that had been hidden in plain sight. But she wasn't done yet. The moment had arrived to push the conversation forward, to steer it back to what had been derailed by the distractions of petty attacks. She leaned forward slightly, her hands resting lightly on the table as she addressed the room with quiet authority. "I didn't come here today for this." Her voice didn't rise, but each word carried the weight of someone who had seen this political game played before and who refused to let it go any further. "I came here to discuss policy, to discuss real solutions to the border crisis that our country faces." The words hung in the air, a challenge, a demand. She wasn't just speaking to Greene anymore. She was speaking to the nation, the viewers at home, the lawmakers in the room, anyone who had ever been frustrated by the constant political theater that seemed to overshadow real progress. Jasmine's gaze never left Greene's face, her eyes piercing through the remnants of Greene's bravado. "But instead of discussing the issues that matter, we've been subjected to a spectacle where personal attacks, not policies, are the focus. where character assassination is prioritized over finding real solutions. Her voice, though calm, began to pick up a steady rhythm, building like the calm before a storm. This isn't just about me, Ms. Greene. This is about all of us. This is about the country that has been forced to endure more of your divisive rhetoric and less of the leadership we need. The room shifted slightly as Jasmine's words landed. A few heads nodded, while others stayed still, caught in the tension of what was unfolding. Greene was on the defensive now, and Jasmine knew she had her pinned. Jasmine didn't let the moment pass, though. She didn't let the narrative slip back into the chaos Greene had tried to create. "So here's my offer, Ms. Greene," Jasmine continued, her voice steady, sharp, like the click of a hammer on a pistol. "Let's put aside the personal attacks. Let's get back to what we're actually here for." She didn't wait for Greene to respond immediately. She was dictating the pace now. Jasmine's eyes never left Greene's as she spoke again, her tone uncompromising, her resolve unshakable. "You see, I'm here to discuss policy. We're here to talk about the border crisis, and I'm ready to move forward if you are. But if you're going to continue to deflect, to avoid engaging in the real issues because you can't win on the facts, then I'll have no choice but to hold you accountable for that too." Greene shifted in her seat, her expression hardening as she realized Jasmine wasn't giving her an out. She had no place to hide now. Every attempt Greene had made to attack Jasmine had backfired, and now the entire focus had shifted back to the real issues. The battle had moved from personal insults to the real politic of governing, and Jasmine had just set the terms for the debate. Greene opened her mouth, but the words didn't come as easily now. Jasmine had tied her hands, cornered her with a choice she couldn't escape: engage on the issues or confirm everything Jasmine had just exposed. Greene knew in that moment that any attempt to further deflect would only confirm her guilt, that the personal attacks weren't about policy at all. It was a game, and she had been playing the wrong one. Jasmine didn't wait for Greene to recover. She knew the decision had already been made. Greene had to choose: stay trapped in her personal vendetta or turn back to the real work they had come here to do. Jasmine's eyes softened for a moment, but the message remained clear. "I'm ready to move on to the real conversation," she said. "I'm ready to discuss the border, the solutions we can create together, not this circus. But if you're not ready to let the politics of personal destruction go, then I'll be forced to keep showing the world exactly who you are." She paused, letting that hang in the air, letting Greene see the road ahead. "It's your choice. Let's talk policy, or let's keep playing this game. But one thing is certain: this game has gone on long enough, and it's time to face the facts." There was no immediate response from Greene, but Jasmine knew the answer. It had already been decided. Greene had lost, and now they would talk about the issues that mattered. The room was electric with tension, the air thick with the weight of what had just transpired. Jasmine Crockett had delivered her unrelenting truth, piece by piece, provision by provision. She wasn't just reading from the bill anymore. She was deconstructing it, exposing its flaws and hypocrisies. Her hands moved with purpose, flipping the pages with the precision of someone who had spent not just hours, but years mastering the nuances of policy. Each word that left her mouth was deliberate, calculated, and it cut through the room like a surgeon's scalpel. Jasmine's voice didn't rise in volume, but the force behind it was undeniable. "Section 5.2, she began, her eyes never leaving the document. "It proposes increasing funding for Border Patrol, but what it doesn't address is the systemic failure of the system. We can throw money at the problem, but without a comprehensive immigration plan, we are just creating a larger, more inefficient bureaucracy. What's the point of building more walls when we're failing to manage the people on the ground?" Her tone was low, deliberate, but each word was like a strike, each sentence driving deeper into the core of the argument. This wasn't a policy debate anymore. It was a challenge to the very foundation of the bill's premise. Marjorie Taylor Greene's face tightened. The questions Jasmine asked weren't rhetorical. They were precise, backed by a wealth of knowledge and expertise that couldn't be dismissed. Marjorie Taylor Greene, caught off guard by the depth of Jasmine's understanding, flipped through her own papers, clearly trying to find something to counter the points being made. She fumbled, the papers in her hands trembling as she searched for a response. The discomfort was evident, but Jasmine's focus never wavered. Let's talk about Section 8.4, Jasmine continued, her voice calm but relentless. It talks about implementing new enforcement measures, but what it fails to mention is the human cost. How do you plan to deal with the families being separated, the children in cages, the human rights violations that continue to happen on a daily basis? These are not just statistics, Ms. Marjorie Taylor Greene. These are people, real people with faces, with families, with lives that are being torn apart because of this misguided policy. She wasn't just quoting provisions from the bill anymore. She was making it personal, connecting the dots between policy and the human beings who lived its consequences. Marjorie Taylor Greene opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. Jasmine wasn't giving her room to breathe, wasn't allowing her to deflect or hide behind hollow rhetoric. She wasn't just making a case for policy change. She was holding Marjorie Taylor Greene accountable for the lives that were affected by the policies she championed. Jasmine leaned in slightly, her gaze sharp, cutting through the atmosphere of the room like a knife. You want to talk about the border crisis, Ms. Marjorie Taylor Greene? Then we need to talk about the whole crisis, not just the rhetoric you're selling, but the reality we're facing. Marjorie Taylor Greene shifted in her seat, her discomfort palpable. She tried to gather her thoughts to cling to the few talking points she had prepared, but they were slipping away, lost to the relentless tide of Jasmine's questions. Jasmine wasn't just winning this debate. She was exposing the fundamental flaws in the argument, forcing Marjorie Taylor Greene to confront the truth in front of a live audience. Section 10.1, Jasmine went on, her voice still unwavering. It talks about strengthening border security, but it does so without any consideration of the infrastructure needed to support it. What's the point of additional security measures when the system behind them is so broken that it can't even process people properly? She paused, letting the question hang in the air. We're talking about people's lives, Miss Marjorie Taylor Greene, not political points. You want to fix the problem, but you're not even willing to confront the systems that are causing it in the first place. Marjorie Taylor Greene's response was nothing more than a weak attempt to shift the conversation back to the same worn-out talking points. Her voice wavered as she spoke, trying to cling to the lines she had rehearsed. But Jasmine's control over the narrative was absolute. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Each statement she made was more than just a question. It was a call to action, a demand for accountability. Ms. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Jasmine said, her eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that could freeze anyone in their tracks. You're so focused on enforcing laws that you've forgotten what it means to be human. This isn't just about policies. It's about the people caught in the crossfire. And until you acknowledge that, you're just spinning your wheels. Marjorie Taylor Greene's face was a mixture of frustration and disbelief, but there was no escaping the facts Jasmine had laid bare. She had nowhere to hide. The questions had been asked, the answers exposed, and it was clear that Jasmine wasn't just the better debater, she was the better leader. Jasmine had made it clear, this wasn't about personal attacks, and it never had been. This was about holding those in power accountable for the decisions they made, and ensuring that those decisions didn't come at the cost of innocent lives. The room was silent, the weight of Jasmine's words hanging in the air, as she slowly began to turn the page. The game had changed, and Marjorie Taylor Greene had no choice but to follow. The aftermath of Jasmine Crockett's masterclass in political discourse was nothing short of explosive. What had begun as a simple exchange of words in a heated congressional hearing had erupted into a viral phenomenon, the shock waves of which reverberated across the entire nation. The truth she had so methodically exposed had found its way into the homes of millions, transcending party lines, captivating a diverse audience, and forcing them to confront the raw honesty that had cut through the usual political noise. The immediate impact was undeniable. The clip of Jasmine's confrontation with Marjorie Taylor Greene began to spread like wildfire. News outlets were running it on an endless loop, pundits dissecting every second, breaking down Jasmine's delivery, her poise, and the absolute precision with which she had dismantled Greene's personal attack. It wasn't just a political debate, it was a moment of reckoning. For days, the clip dominated social media feeds, and the hashtag number Jasmine brings evidence trended, gathering momentum as more and more people saw the clarity and strength behind her words. The phrase "Levitt brings personal attacks, Crockett brings the facts" became a rallying cry for those who had grown tired of the political theatrics that seemed to dominate every news cycle. It was no longer about the specifics of the border debate. It was about something deeper, something more fundamental. It was about restoring integrity to politics and rejecting the age-old tactic of smearing one's opponent to gain political leverage. Jasmine had done something unprecedented. She had turned the tables in the middle of a storm, and now the storm was hers to control. Across platforms, people, from grassroots activists to seasoned political analysts, began to echo the sentiment. "Jasmine Crockett brought the receipts. Marjorie Taylor Greene brought the dirt," read one tweet. It wasn't just a viral hashtag, it was a movement, a shift in the way politics would be viewed moving forward. Jasmine didn't just make a compelling case for her district, for her policies. She redefined what it meant to stand up to the lies and distractions that had consumed the political discourse for too long. The fallout for Marjorie Taylor Greene and her team was swift and unforgiving. The carefully constructed narrative they had tried to weave, where personal attacks replaced policy discussion, began to unravel before their eyes. The entire communications team that had been responsible for orchestrating Greene's attack on Jasmine found themselves scrambling to regain control. The backlash was immediate. Within 48 hours, 3 senior members of Levitt's communications team were quietly forced out of their positions, their professional careers now marked by their failed strategy. Their departure was swift, and it wasn't just a whisper in the corridors of power. It was a public acknowledgement of their failure. They had miscalculated, and the cost was their livelihoods. The humiliation wasn't just personal, it was professional. The entire organization that had backed Levitt's campaign began to fall into chaos. News of the resignations spread quickly through the political press, and soon it wasn't just about who had resigned, it was about who was left standing. Levitt, once seen as a rising star within the GOP, now found herself backed into a corner, unable to recover from the damage done in the public eye. Her attempts to shift the conversation back to the issues were hollow, falling flat against the overwhelming tide of criticism and public scrutiny. The media machine that had once worked tirelessly to propel her career was now turning against her, feeding the narrative that she was unprepared for the weight of the office she sought to hold. Behind closed doors, the turmoil continued. The once impressive apparatus that had supported Levitt's rise was now in disarray. Levitt's staff, rattled by the swift and unexpected resignation of their most senior members, scrambled to understand where everything had gone wrong. The strategy of focusing on personal attacks, of undermining an opponent's character to advance their own agenda, had been a calculated risk, and it had backfired spectacularly. The organization was in crisis mode, unsure of how to move forward, caught in the web of a political storm they could no longer control. The damage wasn't just internal, it was also external, bleeding into the public perception of Levitt's campaign. Her credibility was shattered. No amount of quick thinking or rebranding could cover up the fact that she had made a dangerous choice, one that now seemed completely out of touch with the realities of what Americans wanted to see from their leaders. The personal attacks had alienated potential allies, both within the party and beyond. Even some of her supporters began to question the integrity of the campaign. They had seen the truth laid bare in front of them. Levitt's strategy of dividing and attacking had exposed her own vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett's position could not have been clearer. The victory she had claimed was not just political, it was moral. She had brought the kind of leadership the nation needed, the kind of leadership that prioritized solutions over soundbites, integrity over sensationalism. Her response to the personal attacks had been nothing short of masterful, showing the country what it meant to stand tall in the face of adversity, armed with knowledge, truth, and an unshakable commitment to the issues that truly mattered. Jasmine hadn't just won the debate, she had transformed the conversation. As the days passed, the ripple effect of that confrontation became more pronounced. The political landscape began to shift. The media cycles that had once been dominated by sensational stories about scandal and conflict began to make room for more thoughtful discussions on policy and reform. Jasmine had set the bar. She had made it clear that the days of pandering to the lowest common denominator, of attacking someone's character to score political points, were over. The fallout from Levitt's failure continued to unfold. Within weeks, news broke that her campaign was losing key donors. The messaging that had once won her support was now proving to be a liability. Levitt's organization, already on shaky ground, was rapidly losing the credibility it had worked so hard to build. This wasn't just about one debate or one strategy. It was about the fundamental collapse of a political tactic that had been used to manipulate and divide. In the end, it wasn't just the fallout from a failed attack. It was the realization that, in the new political climate Jasmine had helped create, truth could no longer be buried beneath the weight of lies. The world was watching, and it was Jasmine Crockett who had made sure the truth was louder than the noise. In the days following the hearing, the political landscape began to shift, and it became clear that Jasmine Crockett had not just won a debate, she had revolutionized how to handle political attacks in an era dominated by divisiveness. What had initially seemed like a tactical confrontation had quickly become a blueprint for navigating the poisonous landscape of modern politics. Her response to Marjorie Taylor Greene's personal attacks was being talked about everywhere, on news stations, in think tanks, and across social media platforms. Jasmine had taken the chaos of smear politics and turned it into a masterclass of strategy. Within hours of the hearing, political analysts began dissecting Jasmine's performance, trying to pinpoint what had made her response so effective. The beauty of her counterattack was not just in the words she used, but in the way she dismantled the attack methodically, leaving nothing to chance. By the next morning, the term Jasmine doctrine had taken root in the political world. It was being used as a point of reference, a new standard for how politicians could rise above personal attacks without compromising their integrity. The Jasmine doctrine became a rallying cry for those tired of the toxic, inflammatory tactics that had taken over American politics. The strategy she had used in that hearing wasn't just about winning the moment, it was about setting a precedent, showing that it was possible to confront and defeat these tactics without descending into the mud. Calm, evidence, strategy, substance. These four pillars would define her approach, and it was becoming clear that they were the antidote to the growing toxicity in politics. First, Jasmine had remained calm. Even in the face of personal insults, even as Marjorie Taylor Greene tried to turn the hearing into a circus of character assassination, Jasmine never lost her composure. Her calmness was not just a trait, it was a weapon in and of itself. She didn't give in to the pressure to shout, to scream, to retaliate in kind. Jasmine knew that the calmest voice in the room would ultimately be the loudest one. She understood that rage might make for good headlines, but calmness, when coupled with truth, was the most powerful tool at her disposal. Her calmness was not passivity, it was the calculated confidence of someone who had been in the fight for years, who knew exactly when to speak and when to let her silence carry the weight of her words. Her presence on that stage, still, unwavering, controlled, was her first strike. It disarmed her opponent before the battle even truly began. Second, Jasmine brought evidence. The documents she pulled out, the facts she cited, were not random or thrown together in haste. They were the result of years of experience, research, and legal expertise. Jasmine didn't just speak to challenge Marjorie Taylor Greene's tactics. She spoke with the authority of someone who had spent countless hours in the trenches, fighting against fraud, injustice, and systemic inequality. She wasn't there to engage in rhetoric. She was there to deliver a case, and she did so with an unshakable confidence that left no room for doubt. The memo she revealed, with its damning directive from Greene's own communications team, was the most powerful of all her pieces of evidence. It wasn't just about the facts she presented. It was about the undeniable proof of a deliberate strategy to destroy her character rather than engage on the issues. That memo wasn't just a piece of paper. It was the moment that shattered Greene's facade. In that instant, Jasmine turned the tables completely. The attack had been about her character. Now the world was focused on the character of the attacker. Third, Jasmine exposed the strategy behind the attack. She didn't simply defend herself against the personal smear campaign. She went deeper. She dissected the tactics being used against her, revealing the underlying motivations. Jasmine showed the world that the political games being played weren't just unproductive. They were dishonest and destructive to the process. In that moment, she didn't just become a defender of her own integrity, she became a defender of the entire political system that was being warped by those who chose dirty tactics over actual debate. This isn't about me. This is about the kind of politics we're willing to accept, Jasmine said, turning to the camera and speaking directly to the millions of Americans watching at home. She made it clear that the game wasn't just between her and Greene. It was between those who believed in substance and those who believed in spectacle. She was calling out a larger failure in the system, a systemic issue that had been allowed to fester for too long. Jasmine didn't just call out her opponent. She exposed the decay at the heart of a broken political system. Finally, Jasmine brought it back to the substance, the issues that mattered. When Marjorie Taylor Greene had tried to pivot back to the personal, to sidestep the policy discussion entirely, Jasmine didn't let her. She refused to let Greene control the narrative. Instead, Jasmine turned the conversation back to the facts, the policies, and the solutions that would actually address the crisis at the border. She didn't let her opponent off the hook. She kept the focus where it belonged, on the issues that were affecting real people, not political careers. The brilliance of Jasmine's approach was that she was never distracted. Even when Levitt tried to escape back into the safe zone of political attacks, Jasmine kept pushing forward, forcing the conversation back to what mattered most. She refused to let this become another empty debate. She refused to let the lies be the narrative. In that moment, Jasmine didn't just defend herself, she hijacked the debate entirely. As political analysts, strategists, and pundits broke down the events of the hearing over the following days, one thing became abundantly clear. Jasmine Crockett had set a new standard for how to confront political attacks. It wasn't enough to simply respond. Jasmine had shown the world how to turn the table, how to shift the focus from personal vendettas to real actionable change. Her calmness, her facts, her ability to expose her opponent's strategy, and her relentless focus on the issues had created a new framework for political discourse. The Jasmine Doctrine became the gold standard. It was what every candidate, every politician should aspire to. Calm under fire, armed with facts, never distracted by the noise, and always bringing the conversation back to the solutions that matter. It wasn't just about defending yourself. It was about defending the principles that the system should be based on. As the weeks passed and pundits continued to analyze the moment, the Jasmine Doctrine became more than just a term. It became a call to action for anyone tired of the games, the slander, and the gridlock. It was a new way of doing politics, a way rooted in truth, transparency, and above all, integrity. Jasmine Crockett had set the bar, and now the world was watching to see if anyone else would dare to follow it. In the days following Jasmine Crockett's confrontation with Marjorie Taylor Greene, the world had shifted. What had begun as a contentious political debate had now become a cultural touchstone, a moment that would be analyzed, dissected, and referenced for years to come. The immediate aftermath was palpable. The air felt charged with the weight of what had just transpired. Jasmine had not just won a debate. She had set a new precedent for political discourse. The world had been watching, and in the wake of that viral confrontation, it was clear that the nation had witnessed something far bigger than a mere hearing on border policy. Polls conducted immediately after the hearing showed a dramatic surge in Jasmine's approval ratings, not just among her base or within her party, but across the political spectrum. Support for Jasmine Crockett spiked in areas where it was least expected, where politicians on the opposite end of the spectrum had long believed that divisive rhetoric and personal attacks were the key to winning. Jasmine had shattered that illusion. She had done what many thought was impossible in the age of extreme political polarization. She had earned the respect of both sides of the aisle. The polls spoke for themselves. Jasmine's approval rating jumped sharply, not just in liberal strongholds, but also in more conservative areas, where many had once dismissed her as just another Democratic voice in the chaos of politics. Her calmness, her methodical approach, and the transparency with which she handled the attacks on her character became a beacon of integrity. People weren't just looking at her policies, they were looking at the woman behind them. And what they saw was a leader who, despite the brutal attacks and the weight of personal slander, had stood her ground with grace, with dignity, and most importantly, with facts. It wasn't about whether people agreed with every single policy she proposed. It was about how she conducted herself in the face of unrelenting personal attacks. It was about the way she handled the lowest forms of political strategy with such dignity and strength that even her fiercest critics had no choice but to acknowledge her character. Jasmine had managed to win over hearts, even those who disagreed with her on most policy issues. Her ability to remain steadfast, her refusal to stoop to the level of those who attacked her, became a symbol of what politics could be, if only the system was willing to make room for leaders who prioritized integrity over spectacle. The national conversation began to shift. Political commentators and analysts, who had spent years feeding into the drama of personal attacks, now found themselves confronted with an uncomfortable truth. The politics of destruction, of turning every policy discussion into a spectacle of personal warfare, was no longer effective. It had been rendered obsolete by someone who refused to engage with the same tactics. In fact, some began to wonder if Jasmine had just set a new bar for how public figures could navigate the treacherous waters of political conflict. Her grace under fire, her ability to stay on message and bring the conversation back to policy, had set an example. It didn't take long for others in the political sphere to take notice. Within weeks of the hearing, an unlikely imitation began to surface. A sitting member of Congress, known for his previous personal attacks on opponents, had been watching the events unfold with increasing admiration. He had been a vocal critic of Jasmine Crockett in the past, often mocking her policies and attacking her record. But after the dust settled from the hearing, something remarkable happened. During a televised session of Congress, this very individual found himself in a position to respond to a heated personal attack from a rival. Instead of escalating the conflict, he paused. The room was tense, the cameras focused on him, waiting for the usual jabs, the personal barbs that had become so common in today's political climate. But instead, he looked at the camera, then toward his opponent, and with a calm that mirrored Jasmine's in the hearing, he said, "Can we go back to policy now?" The room was stunned. It wasn't the usual theatrical response. It wasn't the shout of a politician looking for sound bites or trying to own the moment. It was the beginning of a shift, one that was directly inspired by Jasmine's example. In a single measured sentence, this congressman had subtly but powerfully rejected the notion that personal attacks were the only path to success in politics. And the implications were clear. Jasmine Crockett had not only defeated her opponent in that hearing, she had effectively redefined the expectations for how public figures should conduct themselves in political discourse. The response from the public was overwhelmingly positive. Citizens across the political spectrum expressed their approval, not just for the content of the debate, but for how Jasmine had conducted herself. People who had been exhausted by the constant barrage of personal insults, the back and forth of pettiness that seemed to define politics at every level, finally had something different to latch onto. It wasn't just about a politician they agreed with. It was about someone they respected, someone who had chosen a path of decency and integrity, even when the odds were stacked against her. Even the media, for once, was forced to confront the power of substance over spectacle. Talk shows, which had long capitalized on political drama, began to change their tone. Pundits who had spent years fanning the flames of division now found themselves reconsidering the kind of conversations they were having. It wasn't just that Jasmine had won the hearing, she had won something far more important: the public's trust. And in the era of 24-hour news cycles, when public opinion can shift in an instant, trust was the most powerful currency anyone could have. Jasmine Crockett had not just responded to an attack, she had become a symbol of the kind of leadership America had been waiting for. Her response to Leavitt's dirty tactics had created a ripple effect that reached beyond her own political career. It became a template for those tired of the political circus, a blueprint for how to navigate the complexities of leadership with honesty and honor. It was clear now, her victory was about more than just personal vindication. It was about setting a new standard, a standard that said, if you want to win, you don't need to tear others down. You just need to stand tall with the truth. And as the nation began to reflect on what Jasmine had done, the message was unmistakable. Truth, integrity, and a return to policy-based debate were the new way forward. It wasn't just a lesson for politicians. It was a lesson for all of us. A reminder that we get the leadership we demand. And if the political world could adapt to this new model, maybe, just maybe, real change was finally within reach. The fallout from Jasmine Crockett's confrontation with Marjorie Taylor Greene didn't just echo through the political landscape. It sent shockwaves that reverberated across the entire country. Once dismissed as a loudmouth lawyer in the eyes of her critics, Jasmine was now redefined as something far greater, the gold standard for political rebuttals that never compromise dignity. Her calculated, unflinching response to personal attacks had turned her into a symbol of how political discourse could be elevated from the gutter of insults and sound bites to a level of graceful, yet unyielding integrity. Political analysts, pundits, and public figures alike marveled at how Jasmine had turned a hostile environment into a masterclass of composure and conviction. The narrative of her victory, not through shouting or name-calling, but through calm, evidence-backed, and morally sound counterattack, quickly became the subject of widespread admiration. A political science professor wrote, "Jasmine has proven that you can make your opponent bow without needing to raise your voice or insult their character." This wasn't just political commentary, it was a revelation, a blueprint for how to navigate the savage, polarized world of American politics with strength, but without breaking one's moral compass. Soon, Jasmine's response became a case study at law schools, journalism schools, and political science programs. Professors and students alike pored over the strategic elegance with which she'd handled a public attack. Her name became synonymous with the future of political communication, a moment that signaled a potential turning point in American politics. She had defied the conventional wisdom, showing that it was possible to stand firm against political sabotage while still maintaining a sense of respect, integrity, and purpose. The narrative of Jasmine Crockett's triumph had transcended the hearing room. It was now a blueprint for the future of communication in the age of polarization. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.